Radio and discovered our quality talk shows. It's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Welcome to the National Safe Child Show, addressing the health, safety, and welfare of all children nationwide, because it shouldn't hurt to be a child. Here is your host, Tammy Stefano.
Hi folks, welcome to the National Safe Child Show. We have a great show today. We have Dr. Scott Bonn. He is a world-renowned criminologist. He was the only one that was able to do an in-person interview with the son of Sam, and I'm sure maybe not the young folks, but certainly my age or in their 30s, they remember the serial killer, the son of Sam. He has interviewed, profiled, and really delved into the minds of the criminals. We have been trying and inviting him on, and he's quite a busy man. He's also a professor at Drew University, and we're really excited to be honored with his presence. So we're going to get him on. John, whenever you're ready. Okay, so John, our fabulous man that wears all hats and keeps the show going. Hello, Dr. Scott Bond. This is Tammy. How are you?
Very well, and how are you?
I'm doing well. I want to thank you for honoring us and being on the National Safe Child Show before we begin. I know you're quite busy, and it truly is an honor.
Well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. So I briefly gave an introduction of who you were, but I would love for you just to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Sure.
Okay. Ready when you are.
Well, first of all, again, it's a pleasure, and I'm a criminologist, and which means that I study the patterns and motivations of criminal behavior. I'm a college professor, so I teach courses in criminology, and I'm an author as well, and I write about these subjects, and my most recent work is actually a book that comes out on October 7th called Why We Love Serial Killers, The Curious Appeal of the World's Most Savage Murderers, and this is a book that deals with the public's fascination with the macabre and the dark side of things. And the reason that I'm so interested in sort of public attitudes and the way the public understands these sort of issues is I actually have a background in the media. And I worked for more than 20 years in television and advertising, and it became very apparent to me that crime stories and any news story, but particularly a sensationalized news story involving serial killers or terrorism or mass murder or something like that, it tends to be treated almost like an entertainment commodity. It becomes an entertainment commodity, and the more sensationalized it is, the more people will tune in, and the more people that tune in, of course, television networks get to sell a lot of advertising as a result. So it's all part of the entertainment industry, and it occurred to me that is actually the case with serial killers. We as a society tend to turn these individuals into almost anti-heroes and glorify them in a way. And so you can get Charles Manson T-shirts and Ted Bundy pajamas for your children. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's pretty amazing the way we have turned these individuals into pop culture icons.
Why do you think that is? It's so amazing to me. The more I read about you and kind of followed you throughout the past year and watched your work and read your articles, which are numerous, and you have a website, and you're very, active, proactive in really writing about these different people and the different pathologies. Why are we fascinated? I mean, It's
Well,
amazing.
I think that it's multifaceted. There's not just one very succinct answer to that. It's
Okay.
multifaceted, as a lot of things are, especially very interesting things. And at one level, there's the curiosity with something that seems so extreme that the average person just can't comprehend it. When you look at an individual like a Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, who is one of the true, if you will, rock star pantheon serial killers. I mean, he's up there in the, if there was such a thing, a serial killer Hall of Fame. And this is an individual who killed 17 men. He was attracted to young men. He would lure them into his home. He would get them under his control. He attempted to keep them alive, almost like zombies, through a strange array of chemicals and things. And he would ultimately rape and kill them, and even eat them. He was also a cannibal.
Right.
And such behavior is just so bizarre and so incomprehensible that there's this need. It's almost like an innate need among us humans to try to understand such things. And in fact, a very good friend of mine by the name of Dave Carbone, who is a retired homicide detective here in New York, and he worked on the Son of Sam case. I asked him, I said, Dave, is your interest in such things any different than the public? And he said, no. He said, he gave me a great quote from my book, in fact. He said, the why is the wow. And what he means by that is the why of the motivation, why it is that these individuals do these things. And he said that kept him interested as a police officer or a detective, and he believes it's the same thing with the public. But that's just one aspect of it. There's also the fear factor. When I was a little kid, I loved monster movies and
Right.
Frankenstein and the Wolfman and King Kong and on and on. And I think in a way, and actually my research bore this out, is that for adults, serial killers are almost the same as monster movies for children. We like to have the bejesus scared out of us to a certain extent, and it gives us that adrenaline rush. It's almost like a roller coaster ride, or that jolt of adrenaline that you get, and it's addictive. And we like to be scared. So there's a visceral appeal to all of this. And, of course, if it's an ongoing investigation in the news, like the Long Island serial killer here in New York, then it becomes a whodunit story. You get to follow it in the news and see if you can figure it out and maybe beat the police to the punch and figure out who done it. So it's an investigation. Now I'm a trained sociologist, and I'm interested in social psychology very much. And there's a societal aspect to this as well. And I think that for the public, serial killers sort of represent the most extreme behavior that a human being can do. And I mean, after murdering, necrophilia, cannibalism, I mean, what else is there? It really, it's the most reprehensible behavior there is. And so I think it sort of pushes the human condition, and it says, what's the delineation between man and monster, or human and monster? And I think serial killers sort of provide that outer boundary. And so I think they're fascinating in that regard. But they don't look like the average. They don't look like Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street. That's not the way serial killers typically look. They look like the everyman, the Ted Bundy, the charming individual, and that's also part of the fascination, because it could be your next door neighbor.
Right.
It could be your boss. It could be anybody.
I read on your blog. You have that. What does? Forgive me for not quoting it verbatim, but it was more or less saying, what we perceive a serial killer to look like is not at all what he looks like. He is, in fact, the next door neighbor look. He's the clean cut.
Exactly.
He's the employed. He's the very consistent in the community kind of guy or woman. Certainly not
Absolutely.
limited.
Absolutely.
And our perception, we really need to change that, because what happens, what I think, is we put our guards down when we see that clean-cut person, even if, that clean-cut person fit a profile that, in our perception, would be a dangerous person, our guard would be up. But because they
That's
look
right.
like the everyday person, we put our guard down, and it leaves us more susceptible to be taken, maybe like the Dahmer people were taken.
Absolutely. You absolutely nailed it. And I have an article, one of my blog articles on Psychology Today.
Yes.
The title of it is "How to Tell a Sociopath from a Psychopath," and I'm actually very pleased to say that it hit 100,000 readers earlier today.
I saw
and
that.
It's currently the most read article on PsychologyToday.com.
Yay.
And
You get a big applause for that one, because yeah.
Well, thank you. But if your listeners go to psychologytoday.com
Okay.
and click on Wicked Deeds, that's the name of my blog, Wicked Deeds, and the article is How to Tell a Sociopath from a Psychopath. I go into this, and so many of the most prolific, infamous serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Dennis Rader, are this psychopathic personality. And these are individuals that are just completely unassuming, disarming, they're very charming, and they have the ability to get you to drop your guard. And because they're psychopaths, they don't have any of the normal emotions that would inhibit an individual from doing what they do. They have no remorse. They have no fear. They have no shame. And as a result, they are able to do whatever they want, whatever their bloodlusts are, with absolutely no remorse whatsoever. And of course, that makes them particularly and dangerous.
Absolutely. Okay, I've just posted your blog because it's so important. I mean, I was up, I want to tell you, until the wee hours of the morning, and I actually saw this morning when your blog hit that particular article. Actually, it wasn't through your blog, it was through Psychology Today. But when it hit that and you actually posted it on your blog, yay, we hit, we went over. And this is phenomenal. People often have a misconception. In the work that I do, I'm working with people that have very, very severe situations that have come into their lives. A lot of divorce cases, a lot of child abuse cases, and what I hear people consistently say so easily is, this parent is a psychopath, this parent is a sociopath. And the more I heard that, and almost every person that I've dealt with has used that term, after reading your article, I came to realize that they really don't know the difference. And
that's right.
I was so educated by what you wrote, and it really educated me. I really would love for you to touch on that and just tell our listeners the differences so that they don't mislabel whoever it is that they want to put these labels on, because there are
Great.
significant differences.
Great. Yes, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. There's tremendous misinformation and misunderstanding, and not just among the public. I mean, if any of your listeners are saying to themselves, "Gee, this is confusing. I don't understand the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath," don't feel badly, because even among professionals, among forensic psychologists, among criminologists, FBI profilers, there is a lot of debate among these two different terms, and a lot of misunderstanding. I'm going to explain it from my perspective, the way I understand it, and the way I believe. I'll try to put it in terms that people can relate to, because these are, of course, psychological profiles.
Right.
First of all, psychopathy and sociopathy are not considered mental illness. They're considered antisocial personality disorders. Therefore, if someone suffers from one of these things or has one of these things and commits a murder, for example, they are not eligible to use the defense of not guilty by reason of insanity, because a sociopath or a psychopath doesn't fit that category. In order to be not guilty by reason of insanity, you have to be truly insane, meaning that you didn't know right from wrong at the time you committed the crime. And most murderers, most serial killers who are psychopaths, absolutely know right from wrong when they commit murder. They just don't care because they're psychopaths. So I just wanted to set that up front. First of all, it's not mental illness. These are personality disorders. And what distinguishes the two is one, the psychopath really has no ability to feel empathy and has no effect really whatsoever. These are individuals. I like to use the analogy. Imagine an electrical cord. If you have an electrical cord for your TV and it's not plugged into the wall, it's not going to work. Well, imagine if we as human beings, if we have a cord like that, and that's empathy, and when it's plugged in, it's our ability to connect with other human beings and feel that empathetic connection.
Right.
For psychopaths, the cord is completely pulled out of the wall. They simply can't feel it. They do not feel love per se. They don't feel joy. They don't feel fear or remorse or any of these things. They can feel euphoria. They can get excited, but they don't have the normal range of emotions. And this is combined with a tendency to be risk takers, a tendency to want to manipulate and control. They tend to be very egotistical. And they're able to do these terrible things and not suffer the emotional consequences of their crimes or of their behavior because they just don't have those feelings. A sociopath is a little bit different. Okay. A sociopath has that cord connected in the wall. They're able to feel empathy in certain situations. They're able to feel connection with certain people, but only under certain circumstances. Most of the time, they cannot. But a sociopath, for example, might have complete disdain toward the public, but yet have a powerful connection to their sister or their mother or something like that. Okay. So sociopaths are not completely disconnected the way psychopaths are. Okay. And as a result, psychopaths are actually much more difficult to detect and to see coming if they are, going to prey upon you, because sociopaths tend to be more volatile. They tend to be more emotional, have emotional outbursts. They tend to be more erratic in their behavior. And the reason is because their connection to the world and other people goes in and out. So they're not just completely unaffected the way a psychopath is. And in terms of even the source of this, there's debate over whether these individuals are made or whether they're born. And there's a lot of research now that indicates that true psychopaths are born that way, that their brains simply process information electrochemically differently than the normal human brain. And that would explain a lot. That would explain why they just don't have this ability. Now, not every psychopath becomes a killer, and of course not every killer is a psychopath. Right. What typically happens is individuals who have this, missing chip or whatever, if you to use the
sure.
Analogy in the brain, like a computer, right. If it's missing, oftentimes what happens is something in adolescence triggers violence. It's either an experience of violence or they begin tormenting animals and torturing animals, and somehow violence and sex around the age of puberty gets all intertwined. And if they already have this psychopathic personality, sometimes that can trigger then, an individual who goes on to become a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Ted Bundy. But they're very rare, very, very, very rare. It's estimated that there's probably not more than 1 or 2 million psychopaths it sounds like a lot, but out of a population of 300 million in the United States, there's not that many psychopaths.
Right. But are they doing I have a question. Are they doing any research that you're aware of that other than them being born and maybe having this chip that's there or not there, or blocking maybe the dopamine flow that allows us to have some balance with excitement, do you think that there's any correlation, or is there any research to show such, that it might be based on abuse when they were children? Or is that not something that they're even looking at?
No, well, it's a great question, and yes, there's a lot of research in that area. And I was just about to get to this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. Thank you for the segue. It's a perfect segue. It's more likely that what you're describing is the sociopath. The sociopath is the individual who is likely nurtured, if you will, into it through a history of abuse, through torture as a child, through neglect, through possibly head trauma, a blow to the head. It's more likely that sociopaths are created as opposed to born.
Okay.
And the sociopathic brain does not appear to necessarily operate differently than the normal brain, unlike the psychopathic brain, which does. Now, even psychopaths, there's a correlation between psychopathy and violence, and psychopathy and serial killing, but by no means do all psychopaths become prolific serial killers. In fact, if you look at the characteristics of a psychopath, very driven, very self-centered, very motivated, very goal-oriented, which is all still consistent with a psychopath, oftentimes psychopaths actually become very successful in society and in business, because they don't worry if they step on people climbing the corporate ladder, for example. So not necessarily do they become killers. They might actually become very successful politicians, lawyers, or corporate CEOs.
Gosh, I would definitely agree with you. Without naming anybody, I could probably, I can think of a couple of psychopaths right now who are in the political arena. So, interesting.
Absolutely. Well, a colleague of mine, Kevin Dutton, over in England, has done a lot of research just on on the success of psychopaths, and he's been able to demonstrate that the psychopaths tend to do very well in life. They tend to be very successful, and they just don't worry about their you or I, before we most of us, before we would think about completely blindsiding a coworker or an employee to get ahead, we would think about it. We would say, "Gee, really, that's not the right thing to do."
Right.
A psychopath doesn't care. They're just more
they
than
don't have a
happy to step on
conscience. It sounds like they're void of the conscience.
Exactly. Well, for my research for my book, I extensively corresponded with and interviewed a couple of notorious serial killers, including the son of Sam, which was David Berkowitz, and Dennis Rader, who called himself Bind, Torture, Kill. And Dennis Rader referred to his victims simply as projects. They weren't even human beings. They weren't victims. They were projects. They were just interesting things to do. And what did he do with them? Well, his name says it all: bind, torture, kill. And he's a complete psychopath, and he was so obsessed with killing, and at the same time so narcissistic and obsessed with publicity and promoting himself, he actually started sending letters to the police when he didn't see enough articles in the local press in Wichita, Kansas, where he was killing. And so he sent a letter to the police, and he said, "How many people do I have to kill before I start getting some publicity? Call me, bind, torture, kill. You will hear from me again."
Wow. So it was driven by he needs the attention, and he wants to. I mean, I'm not a criminologist, but it sounds like some of these killers want to control the attention completely.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's, and again, if you'll allow me to give a little scandalous plug for my book.
Yes, please.
It's called Why We Love Serial Killers,
right.
And it comes out this October. and it's actually available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and a lot of the other sites for a 20% discount, pre-order discount, and you don't pay until October when the book ships. But I have an entire chapter devoted to motivations. I have an entire chapter devoted to psychopathy and sociopathy related to serial killers. And the motivations of serial killers, it's not one size fits all. So there is a type of serial killer which is represented by Dennis Rader, Bind, Torture, Kill. It's called a power control killer. It's literally the category that he fits into. For him, the domination, the control, the torture of the individual, and he would torture, do terrible things to people before he killed them. That was for him the ultimate excitement. The killing was almost the after the fact. It was really stalking the individual, attacking them, gaining control, tying them up, which is Bind, Torture, Kill. That's what he did, and so it was, yes, that control was absolutely essential to him. Absolutely essential.
Wow. It reminds me of the book from H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds. You know, and when my son and I were just reading it, and there was one part in the book that I kind of thought about you, because it said, you know, these aliens are looking at humans as if in the same respect that a human looks at an ant. There's no thought process when you step on the ant. There's no consciousness. And they were looking at these humans in the same way. And it sounds like these serial killers look at their prey in the same way. At least the psychopaths. No consciousness.
Oh, absolutely.
And just,
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Ted Bundy referred to his victims as objects, and Dennis Rader referred to them as projects. And in fact, Bundy went on to explain. He said, to the extent that I humanized them, to the extent that these victims actually have names, and he killed women, dozens of women.
Right.
To the extent that they had names and they became individuals, it took the pleasure away, because he didn't want to personalize it. They were just a commodity and fed his appetite. And now he was a different type of killer. He was a lust killer.
Right.
Sex was very much part of his motivation.
And he was very charismatic. He was a good-looking guy. He was charismatic. He was he spoke, very well, and it was easy for him. It's that unsuspected individual, right?
Yep. Ted Bundy, probably more so than any other serial killer, represents the complete psychopathic boy next door, the one that you would absolutely never suspect. He was successful in politics. He had gone to law school. He had friends. He was considered the up-and-comer. He was going to really be somebody, and no one had any idea that he had this dark side, that he had this lust for sex and murder. No idea whatsoever. And because he was a psychopath, he was able to cover this up. And Bundy was actually unusual for serial killers in many ways, that he had such a public persona and was so well known and highly regarded as a person. At the same time, he was doing these terrible things, but he also killed in multiple states. And most serial killers, tend to have a home base, an area where they feel comfortable, and they tend to or tend to do their work in one particular location.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Bundy hopscotched the country. I mean, from Seattle, Washington down to Florida.
Right.
So he was a bit unusual.
Wow. Yeah, he definitely was. I would definitely agree with you there. You watch these movies. You had this drive to go into this field. What keeps you there? I mean, it's such a dark place. Do you feel like you get into the minds? I mean, have you ever thought that you can almost predict, when the killer hasn't been caught, what his next move is going to be, maybe similar to, a profiler.
Well, I find all of that fascinating. I'm trained as a criminologist, but it's based in sociology, so it's really all about society.
Right.
And part of my book, I talk about the fact that serial killers, whether we like it or not, they are part of society. They are us. There's this tendency to represent them as this boogeyman, as a ghoulish monster. And I actually did extensive research looking at the way that serial killers are portrayed and the way they're defined in the media, both entertainment media and the news media. And they're typically referred to as evil, monster, vampire, ghoul. Those are the kind of words that are used. Those are inhuman terms. But in reality, these individuals are us, and therein lies part of the fascination that we cannot comprehend all of this. And as a criminologist, that fascinates me, but it also fascinates me not just the crimes themselves, but the fact that these individuals are part of the popular culture. Jeffrey Dahmer jokes and Charles Manson paraphernalia and games and books and videos and
It's
puzzles.
just unbelievable.
This is all part. It's all part of the popular culture. So they are part of the tapestry of U.S. culture, and I just find that fascinating as a sociologist.
What do you think that the biggest misconceptions are about them when it comes to, say, the media?
Oh, well, great question. And there are a lot of misconceptions. The typical stereotype of the serial killer that is represented in entertainment media as well as the news media is that of a sort of dysfunctional loner and a white male in their 20s or 30s who lives out in the woods somewhere or has a house by himself. And the ultimate example of that was the character, the Tooth Fairy, in the Red Dragon, which is part of the series of Silence of the Lambs,
right.
And part of that whole storyline. And now there have been serial killers like that, the dysfunctional white male loner, once again. And so Joel Rifkin, for example, who was the most prolific serial killer in the state of New York, killed 17 prostitutes in New York back in the 90s. He did fit that profile, but serial killers come in every shape, variety, gender, race, religion, educational level that one can imagine. And in fact, one of the things that I talk about in my book that people find incredible, but yet it's true, if you look at all the murders in the United States that are committed, and there's currently about 15,000 murders annually in the United States, which has gone down dramatically from the 90s, by the way. We're at almost an all-time low in homicide, which is a wonderful thing.
Wow.
But about 10% of those murders are committed by women. If you look, however, at just the serial killer component of those 15,000 murders, about 1% of all murders annually are committed by serial killers. So they're very rare, they're very exotic, contrary to how popular they are in TV shows, etc. You turn on any Law and Order, any TV show, and it's probably about a serial killer. Well, they're actually only responsible for 1% of all murders, and yet almost 20% of all serial murders are committed by women. So women are actually statistically more likely to be a serial killer than a murderer who only kills one person, which is, I think, rather fascinating.
That is fascinating. And I find that,
yeah.
I mean, hadn't you said it, and you're not an expert, if you weren't an expert, I would find that extremely hard to believe.
Yep. Somewhere between 15 and 20% of all serial killers are actually women. And they come in all races.
Sure.
Once again, the white serial killer is a stereotype. There are black serial killers, there are Asian serial killers, there are Middle Eastern serial killers, you name it. But the reason is they tend to kill in their own communities, and the media tend to focus on white female victims, and therefore it's the white serial killers that are that tend to become the ones that are in news stories, because it's white serial killers killing white victims, typically white females. But guess what? You go into urban areas, and there are black serial killers, as I said, there are Latino serial killers. You just don't hear about them in the mainstream media.
Why is that?
There is a focus in our society on white female victims. Think about what we refer to in criminal justice as the top of the wedding cake crime cases and in particular trials, and the ones that are just get 24/7 news coverage on CNN and headline news and so forth. If you think about it, the victim in a murder case or a trial is almost always an attractive white woman. Almost always.
Right.
And if you think about trials through history, the ultimate being, of course, Nicole Brown Simpson.
I was just thinking about
murdered.
her. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the quintessential example right there. But try to think of a high-profile murder case where the victim was not a white female. Lacey Peterson, if you remember Lacey Peterson, who was killed by Scott Peterson, her husband. Once again, an attractive young white woman. There's even a phenomenon, and this is not just murders. This is missing persons too. We criminologists call it missing white woman syndrome. When was the last time you heard about a high-profile case where a Korean man was missing? Don't Korean men ever go missing? No, it's always attractive young co-eds, white women disappearing in Aruba, right?
Wow.
Isn't that who's always missing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I hadn't thought about it until now.
Yep. What about those missing black men and those missing Middle Eastern men?
That's right.
Don't they go missing?
That's right. That's absolutely right. So it really is. It's a media-driven atmosphere where we're going to hold on to that perception, or we're not even going to consider it unless we're lucky enough to interview you and have this discussion with you or a criminologist. We're just going to assume as a society that these are the only crimes that are happening, and these other crimes, even though they could fall under the serial killer aspect, we're not even going to consider them because of their ethnicity or their gender.
Absolutely. And, this is, again, because of my background in the media, I became very aware of this. If you think about news, as a commodity, as a product, a news story only becomes a news story because somebody at the high level at the television networks who has the authority and power to make it a news story decides that it's news. And a billion things happen every day, but only a dozen or two break through and become major national and international news stories. Think of the power that a small group of individuals have to decide what is news and what is not.
And that makes so much sense, because there are some issues that a group of us have investigated, and I will tell you, we cannot get any media coverage, and these are very serious issues, and it allowed me to really take a second look at it really is driven by our thought process, what we believe, what we don't believe, and what we believe to be prevalent is all based on what the media is feeding us, and not really the realities.
That's absolutely right. We call it. There's a term for it. Okay. It's called framing, and what framing is not just the story. It's the way, the angle that it's given. And not to get all political here, but if you think of a story in the news that has a political bent, depending upon what television network you watch, you get a completely different angle on that very same story. There's certain television networks that are known to be more liberal, progressive in nature, and there's certain networks that are known to be more conservative in nature. And depending how you want your news served up, you can get it with the spin that you want. So that's they're really. I believe that objectivity is really out the window in terms of reporting. It's spun, and it's just you pick your flavor of spin.
Right, absolutely. You've written several books. I want to touch on your book now, and I know that you've already said it, but I do want to touch on it for a moment. What drove you to write this particular book? So name the books that you have written, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, my first book is called Mass Deception, Moral Panic, and the U.S. War on Iraq, and that's a more political treatment, and it's tied to what we're talking about here, because I make an argument that the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003 was basically a big advertising campaign to promote going to war. And I showed this was actually based upon my doctoral dissertation. I started this research in right after 9/11 when I was down at the University of Miami in Florida, and I began looking at this situation, the build up to the Iraq War. And I based my doctoral dissertation on it, and I was able to show how the rhetoric, the propaganda, if you will, that was used after 9/11 toward Iraq specifically, weapons of mass destruction, axis of evil, all of these terms, the way that they were used to basically target Iraq and gain support of the public to go to war. So I did an analysis over a several-year period to show how public opinion was manipulated, essentially. And so, again, it involves the media, it involves public perceptions, and which, as I said up front when we first started talking, tends to be one of the things that I'm very interested in. And so it's actually related to my work with serial killers, because they're essentially packaged up as ghouls and sold to the public as well, and but in a different way.
Right. Do you think there's a couple of questions that people are emailing me. Do you think that all psychopaths are narcissistic? Are they narcissists?
There's a correlation there.
Okay.
Meaning that many of them are. It's not an absolute requirement, because narcissism is actually a separate disorder. But the two things, there's definitely a relationship between the two.
And would you say the same? Would you give me the same answer if I presented the question regarding sociopaths?
Yes, but psychopaths even is stronger correlation to narcissism.
Okay. Is there, if we were out, we see this man screaming at this woman, he's grabbing her, you can tell that she's fearful, there's probably domestic violence going on, there's definitely a control issue, she's submissive to him, he's controlling. Would that fall under the psychopath or the sociopath? More or less. I mean, we can't say, but that public display, that that inability, if you will, to be able to control yourself or control the rage maybe that is inside of you when you have witnesses.
That sounds, what you're describing, I mean, I think we would need more information,
right.
But it sounds more sociopathic than psychopathic.
Right.
Because, remember, psychopaths are able to control. They're the ones who know the right thing to do. They mimic the behavior correctly, and it's that dark side when no one's watching where they're really acting out and doing what they want to do. Sociopaths are the ones that tend to be more volatile, tend to have fits of rage and mood swings. So what you're just describing, I would say seems more consistent with a sociopath than a psychopath.
That's, the more I'm looking at it, that's what I'm coming to understand, and certainly through your article, I'm coming to understand that as well. It seems to me that psychopaths have this ability to control themselves regardless of the anger that is welled up inside. They have that ability to maintain their public image for a time being anyway, so that nobody ever sees that real dark side of them.
Right, and also anger is an emotion.
Right.
And BTK, Dennis Rader, through my correspondence with him, he felt no anger. Anger was just not one of his range of emotions. His only real emotions or feelings were frustration when he didn't get what he wanted. He did experience an adrenaline rush, sort of a euphoria and a thrill from killing, but the whole spectrum of emotions he just didn't have. So anger is not high on the list of psychopaths.
Right.
They're cool. They are cool cucumbers.
Wow, that's amazing. Rapists. When they, and I'm speaking generalized, of course, and I know that your response or your answers are going to be based just generally and not in any specific areas. Rapists, are they sexually driven, or is there a group of rapists, people that rape, that it has nothing to do with sex, but everything to do with control?
Oh, absolutely. As a criminologist, and regardless of whether they're psychopaths or sociopaths, I can tell you as a criminologist that rape is primarily a crime of power and domination and control, and sometimes even humiliation and manipulation. It has less to do about sex than it does with power and control, and then when you get to serial killers who sometimes are also rapists, it's the same thing.
Right.
The rape oftentimes is just part of the whole domination and control and humiliation aspect.
So many people ask me that, and I'm glad that I got that answer. Okay, your new book. Let's touch on this for a minute. Time goes by so quickly. Let's touch on this. I want to post this. I want you to give the listeners the name of your blog as well. Maybe start there.
Start with the blog?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's Wicked Deeds, WICKED, Deeds, DEEDS, and you'll find this on psychologytoday.com. And again, I'm Scott Bonn, BONN, and I post articles there almost every week. So there's several dozen there right now on a range of topics, much of it dealing with sociopaths, psychopaths, and murder. But there are other topics there as well, including white-collar crime, domestic violence, self-defense recommendations for women, a whole range of things. And then my book is called Why We Love Serial Killers, The Curious Appeal of the World's Most Savage Murderers, and it comes out on October 7th from Skyhorse Press.
Excellent.
And it's actually currently available, however, for pre-orders, and most of the online services, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble, are offering a 20% pre-order discount, which you don't pay until it ships in October. So, and many of these topics that we're talking about today, sociopathy, psychopathy, I do cover in this new book.
You're getting great reviews already. I mean, they're saying it's compelling. They couldn't put the book down. It seems like this could be well on its way to being a bestseller, and certainly there are going to be an enormous amount of people that are going to feel compelled because they are just as fascinated, as you've already pointed out, I certainly am, with understanding more about these killers. And it seems to be, I know that you said that the number is decreasing, or the murder rate is decreasing. Seems to me that what I see is children are killing, they're planning. You hear about these stories in school where they're actually planning to take somebody out. I mean, we didn't hear about that back in the day. Maybe it's just because the media didn't tell us about it, and maybe it's always existed.
Yeah, well, you bring up some really good points, and a couple of observations, couple of things. So, murder in the United States has actually been pretty much steadily declining since the mid '90s. Murder in the United States peaked in 1993, right around 24,000 murders annually. Now it's down to 15,000, so that's a big drop off, which is wonderful. I mean, it's a great thing. We don't want people out there, killing each other.
Right.
However, the serial killer portion has remained consistent at 1%. So even when it was high, even when it was up at 24,000 a year, it was the serial killer component was still only 1%. So that's remained
that's interesting.
constant.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
And they're consistent.
Yeah, right, exactly, and it belies the notion. Once again, it bursts the myth that serial killers are responsible for the bulk of the murders out there. If all you do is watch the entertainment crime shows and stuff, you think that serial killers are killing about half the people who are murdered in the United States, and that's just nowhere close to being true.
So most of the murders that are committed then are really just spontaneous, emotional driven anger. They're not this serial killer motivated, planned, non-emotional. Would that be accurate?
You nailed it. The average, the most likely murder is actually just completely unplanned, spontaneous crime of passion.
Right.
Whereas serial killers tend to meticulously plan these things out.
Right. Okay, I hate to end this because I could talk to you for hours and hours, Scott, and unfortunately, our time is up. I want to thank you so much. I have posted your blog site. Is there a way that the listeners can contact you, or should we just direct them to go to your blog? Do you want to give an email out? What do you think?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter.
Okay.
I am at Doc Bonn, DOCBONN, on Twitter.
Excellent.
And also you can leave messages on my blog, on my Psychology Today blog. You can contact me right there.
Excellent. I'm already following you. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of listeners following you. We'll have this show posted in the next 48 hours. We thank you. I thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy day, and I'm going to continue to just honor you, and I'm going to push for your book.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to you.
It's our pleasure. Take care. Ready to go? Yes. Excellent show. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, UBN Radio. Thank you, Ann and Tony. Have a great day.
The views and opinions expressed in these radio programs are those of the individual hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of Universal Broadcasting Network.